Welcome people to planet Earth and all planets beyond. My name is Josh and today we're going to answer the question, how can I tell how old my Lee denim jeans are? And there's a lot of reasons to answer that question, but one of them is because, and it's no secret now, people collect vintage denim and people will pay large sums of money for that denim. And that's actually where today's sponsor comes in. WeBuyOldJeans.com wants to buy your old Lee, Levi's, Wrangler, any old denim that you might have lying around. Maybe it was your grandfather's, maybe it was your great-grandfather's. They want to buy it. They offer simple transactions, cash same day in some cases. You won't pay for shipping, you won't pay for fees. The offer they make is the money that you will get. And they have some of the best pricing in the business. So check out We Buy Old Jeans today if you're looking to sell your jeans or just looking to find out more information about them. Now let's talk about some methods you can use to identify the age of your Lee jeans. The very first one is the care tag method, and this is one that is actually basically a universal method across all garment dating practice. And that's because in 1971, the FTC passed a rule that required garment manufacturers to include wash instructions in their garments. So by 1972, when the law was enforced, most garment manufacturers were including wash instructions. So this creates a great dividing line between before and after 1972. So if your Lee garment has wash instructions, it's most likely from after 1972, and this can be a big help in identifying your Lee jeans. If it does not have a care tag, it may be earlier than 1972. You just got to make sure that it wasn't cut out or worn out. So the next method is, was it made in the United States? Lee was proud to make their jeans in the United States for almost 100 years. But after the passing of NAFTA in 1984, that accelerated their move to outsource production overseas. And by the early 2000s, all of their production had moved overseas and all U.S. production had ceased. So if your Lee garments were produced in the United States outside of a very small handful of modern reproductions, they are from the early 2000s or older. And even more likely, they are from the early 90s or older. Now, there's a subsequent method that you can use that kind of helps and goes hand in hand with being made in the United States, and that is the United Garment Workers of America stamp that they included in the production of their garments. And that's because Lee was proud to use union labor for much of their textile production. And because of that, they marked their garments as union made by sewing a label into an inside of a pocket of a jacket or jeans, or like they did in the 80s, stamping that union stamp on the back of the care tags. Subsequently, after NAFTA was passed, the United Garment Workers of America dissolved, and their stamps were no longer used on Lee garments because they no longer existed. So that gives us a little bit of a clue as to the age of your jeans, whether or not it has a union stamp or not. If it has one, it was produced before the mid-90s. If it does not, it's possible that it was produced after the mid-90s. And more specifically, if it has the union label sewn into a pocket, that would have been a pre-1980s thing. As they started to put that on the size label or the care tags in the 80s and into the 90s. And now another method we can use to identify our 1980s and 1990s Lee jeans is the wash. It wasn't until the 80s and 90s that Lee began to really diversify their denim wash. Stonewashing didn't really start until the late 70s, and Lee didn't pick it up until the 80s. And obviously, if you were around for the acid wash era, you know acid wash was a fad in the mid-80s to the early 90s. Prior to the 80s, Lee had basically a standard blue color for their denim, and there wasn't much variety. So if your jeans have a different or unusual wash, it's most likely because they were produced in the 1980s or 1990s. Now quickly, before we go any further, would you be so kind as to click that subscribe button down at the bottom? It's free to do. Help us get to 20,000 subscribers before the end of the year. We'd really appreciate that. Now let's take a look at some methods we can use to identify older Lee garments. The first one we're going to look at is the presence of selvage denim. Now, if you don't know what selvage denim looks like, it looks just like this right here. You can see there are two white lines on either end of this seam. And this particular seam is the inside of the out seam of a pair of jeans. Selvedge denim was used by Lee up until the early 70s. Now the reason the seams look like this is because from this era, denim was produced with reams that had self-contained edges like you see here. These are the reason we call them selvedge or self-edge. Later, as denim products would be more mass-produced, they replaced these reams of self-contained selvedge denim with raw edge denim so that they would need to use overlock or serge seams in order to contain the fraying. And this is one of the reasons that selvedge denim is so desirable, is because it comes from an era in which mass production wasn't the be-all, end-all, and there was some craft and some dignity associated with the production of these garments. So if you see a Lee garment with selvedge or even half selvedge, you can be confident that your garment is older than the early 1970s. Now the next method we can use to identify the age of our Lee garments is by using the label found on the pockets of jackets and of jeans. Here you can see this one right here. These labels come in 3 formats, and each format is associated with a certain time period of production. Now the first and oldest of these labels is the one that just contains the word Lee. No other symbols. This is the earliest version of the label and ran until about 1957. Then, around 1957, when the United States implemented trademark protections, Lee added the United States trademark symbol to this label. You can see on this Lee 100J Westerner jacket that this actually has the trademark symbol sewn in on the seam. This label with the Lee and the trademark symbol only lasted from approximately 1957 all the way into the very early 70s. Then in the early 70s, they added one more symbol, and this was an MR. You can see an example here. Now there is a little bit of mystery as to what this MR actually stands for, but currently the best theory is that this is actually the Mexican trademark symbol, and it was used to protect Lee trademarks in Mexico. So if your Lee garment has the Lee branding on it, the US trademark symbol, and the MR, it was produced after the early 1970s. Now a quick word about this method. Lee has somewhat recently gone back to just using the Lee branding on that label. No trademark symbol and no MR symbol. So you'll have to watch out for the presence of larger care tags that are clearly not vintage. The next method you can use is the long L. This long L was used on buttons, most predominantly on Lee coveralls, overalls, jeans, and jackets. And this was used for many years prior to 1957 or so. If you see a Lee garment with that long L, you're looking at a very old garment, older than the 1957. Here's a chart of a bunch of Lee size tags that were used throughout the decades. There are a lot of them, and generally these lists that you'll see and find on the internet are relatively accurate. They're not entirely accurate. There's a lot of inconsistency because Lee produced so many different garments, and some of these logos and labels were used interchangeably and inconsistently throughout the decades. But generally speaking, if you see these labels, you're looking at something relatively old. Again, the trouble using these labels is that Lee, again, has begun using some of these labels in their modern production. So it can be really confusing if you see one of these labels and you see it and it turns out to be a modern garment. So you can use these charts, and I'll link them in the description below, but you have to make sure that you use some of these other methods that we talked about earlier to discern whether or not you're looking at a modern reproduction or an authentic original vintage denim. That'll get you a rough idea. If you still have questions, you can contact me. My contact is in the information in the description below, or you can contact the sponsor at WeBuyAllJeans.com, and they can help you out and give you more information. Thank you guys for watching. We hope this helps. We'll see you later.